Hi, and welcome to a tutorial for your DDE Unit 2, which is the teaching practice part of this unit, and I'm going to talk you through everything you need to do to complete that unit. So firstly, just an overview. If you were somebody that completed your assisted lessons, then you are going to have to teach 5 lessons over 5 consecutive weeks. If you were someone who was exempt from your assisting lessons, you'll be teaching 10 lessons over 10 consecutive weeks. So if you're going to teach 5 lessons, it can be any level from primary to intermediate. It can be any genre in which you're completing your DDE. A minimum of 5 students, must be an ISTD class, and your tutor will come and observe you probably around lesson 3 to complete your interim assessment. Most of those details are the same if you're doing your assisted lessons, except that you're going to do 10 lessons, so you're going to do 2 sets of 5 classes. One of those 5 will be primary to grade 3, the others will be grade 4 to intermediate. Again, 5 students, ISTD class, and your tutor this time would come and observe you on around lesson 7 or 8 for your interim assessment. Ideally, the class that you want to use for your final assessment will be the second class that you use, so that we can go straight into your final assessment. And for either candidate, your final assessment is going to happen after you've done either your 5 or your 10 lessons, so it'll be your 6th or your 11th, and then you're going to complete one final lesson plan evaluation and teach a lesson, which will be filmed and will upload to YouTube, which your examiner will then watch and review the footage and mark you, and then you'll have a 15-minute Zoom Viva, which is a conversation between you and your examiner to discuss how you got on. So here you can see the lesson plan that you're going to be using. So if we just quickly run through, but I will go through in detail in a minute, the kind of things you can write in all these different sections. So firstly, you just need to fill in the lesson at the top, so maybe that's lesson 1 of 5, your details, it's pretty self-explanatory, your aims and objectives of the lesson, your notes for differentiation, inclusion and motivation, your safe dance practice notes, and then this section here you can extend for as long as it needs to be, which will be your actual plan for your class. So you complete that before the class. Then you teach the class, and then you complete this page, which is your evaluation. You can see it's 800 words maximum, so it's roughly 100 words per question, and you're just going to go through these questions, which we'll look at in more depth in a minute. You'll then send that document, so the plan and the evaluation in one document, to your tutor, who will then write comments here to you. Potentially that may need a discussion via Zoom or otherwise, and you will also just need to fill in your name and PIN at the bottom here. And that's one of your lesson plans and evaluations done. So let's look in a bit more detail about what you actually need to do. So, as explained, you will need to formally plan and evaluate each lesson and send it to your tutor, who will then give you the feedback. So we'll start with the aims and objectives, which was the top part of your plan. So aims are kind of your general statements concerning your overall goals of teaching. So they're going to be a little bit longer, maybe they might be for kind of a term or a year, is the bigger picture thinking. Probably 3 aims, something like that, 2 to 3 per lesson works well, and try to use some aims that are ideally kind of one that's sort of technical and maybe one that's artistic and then another one of your choice, so you've got a nice range. Objectives, on the other hand, should relate to the aims. So each objective, you may have more than one objective to relate to each aim. They're kind of the individual stages that your learners need to go through in order to achieve your aim. So they need to be related to sort of specific tasks for your lesson. We're going to try and use active verbs for these. So try not to say that your objective is that all your students will understand or they'll know something, because how are you going to know that they know it or understand it? So we use words like the fact that they could demonstrate or they could explain, so that we know exactly how you're going to assess whether that objective is met. You may have heard of SMART targets. Your objectives need to be SMART, which stands for specific. So you need to explain exactly what it is that you are trying to achieve so that we all know whether or not it's worked. Measurable. So there's no use having a objective, but you've got no idea how you're going to actually assess whether or not that was achieved. Achievable and realistic. So you're not going in your grade 1 class and trying to teach them 32 fouettes. You're giving your students objectives and targets that are achievable and realistic, and then time bound. So again, it would be ridiculous to say to those grade 1s to do 32 fouette turns, but maybe in 12 years time they might be able to. So it's about putting a target and a time frame on the target that you set, otherwise it hasn't got any context. So let's give you some examples of those. So a lesson aim might be something like to increase the students' understanding of rhythm, or to increase the students' creativity in their own choreography. So you can see that these are quite general, quite big, broad aims. And then we're going to look at some objectives, which are the actual steps you'll take to making those aims happen. So how do we know that you're going to increase the students' understanding of rhythm? What are you specifically this lesson going to do to kind of move towards that goal? So here we've got students will be able to clap even eighth or accented eighth notes individually. Students will be able to dance set rhythm correctly alongside my demonstration. So they're the two things that we want to achieve this lesson in order to contribute to that wider goal of increasing their understanding of rhythm. And then in relation to the choreography aim, students will be able to show the difference between the two pieces of music in their choreography by using movements and expressions which are appropriate to each style. So something like that can be quite a vague objective if you're not careful, and that's why you've got to be that specific. So if you just said, I want to make them look more creative, well, how do you know if they've actually done that? So by saying that, well, in their movements and their expressions, I want to see that they've actually identified those two different types of music, then you've given that specific and measurable target. Now, the key thing, and maybe this is the most important thing in this whole unit, is that those aims and objectives need to be threaded through the lesson. The more times you can reinforce an idea, the more likely they're going to be achieved. So one of the main faults that we see with new teachers is they plan their lesson based on the exercises that they fancy doing, or the students need to learn still in order to complete the syllabus, or whatever it happens to be. And basically their plan is a list of exercises they're going to cover. And that is the wrong way round of approaching this. What we need to do instead is look at what the wider aims and objectives are for that group of students, and then plan accordingly. So if, for example, you're doing the second aim here, which is trying to get more creativity in their own choreography, and in that objective we're looking at being able to identify the difference between pieces of music, then you're not just going to do one task in the middle that kind of helps that. You will do tasks throughout the whole lesson which will aid that. So you may, for example, show two contrasting exercises, like you might do the arm exercise of a lyrical style and discuss that, and then go into the isolations of a jazz style and discuss that. So your aims and objectives, your whole lesson, the purpose of that lesson is to achieve the objectives that you've set out, not to cover a certain range of material. So we need to pick the aims and objectives first, and then we need to pick the exercises which fit in to being able to achieve those aims and objectives. So really think about that when you're setting your aims and objectives, because quite often a mistake that people make is they set something just to have written something because there's a box for it, and then they just do a random class that isn't to do with it at all. So the key thing you're marked on is, do you set appropriate aims and objectives, and do you actually integrate those into your class? Okay, next up we have a box for differentiation, inclusion and motivation. So first of all, what do those words mean? So differentiation is the process by which the process by which differences between learners are accommodated so that all students in a group have the best possible chance of learning. And that's a little quote from the Training and Development Agency for Schools. So the first thing we need to do is actually distinguish between our different learners' abilities, and you can spend some time thinking about that when you get to know your class and think, well, what are the differences? And then you've got to think how you're going to adjust your class content as a result. And this is one of the key things that you're marked on in both your interim and your final assessment. And it's one of the key things that new teachers leave out, because they have a class in their head, they deliver the class, everyone does the same thing, and then we all go home. And actually, that isn't what we're looking for. We're looking to make sure that each of those learners has been catered to in their own way, which makes it a much harder job for you as a teacher, but that is our job as teachers. So what kind of things could we differentiate? It could be a different pace. So, you know, I am going to get you guys over there to work through 4 tasks, but we're going to just work on 1 over here. So they're working much more quickly. Or we change the task. So we're going to work on the right. I now need you guys to go and work this out on the left. It could be individual help because a certain learner is finding a certain thing very difficult. It could be collaborative work, could be use of resources, and it could be based on any difference. So that obvious difference is in relation to ability. You always are obviously going to have a wide range, especially if you're teaching in sort of after school dance schools where there isn't an audition process or anything, you know, it's everybody is welcome. Well, inevitably you're going to have a huge range of natural ability, a huge range of academic and intelligence ability to be able to pick up choreography, retain choreography, a difference in learning style. We've got our very visual learners who just need to see it once and they can recreate it. You've got your auditory learners that really need to have it all explained to them before they want to have a go and they want to listen to your voice explaining it. You've got your kinesthetic learners who need to feel it in their own body. Maybe they need tactile correction to get it right. It could also be differentiation for different genders. So you may give the boys a different task to the girls or different physiques. Now, this is an essential part of this unit and also your teaching forevermore. But of course, especially with children, it needs to be done very sensitively because we don't want children to feel that they've been left out or they're not allowed to do that bit because they're not good enough. So of course, all of this needs to be approached very sensitively, but it is essential. So that's differentiation. Inclusion, how are you going to ensure that all your learners are fully included in the lesson? So it's very easy to have your real bolshy, confident little kids up at the front or teenagers up at the front that want to answer every question, and your slightly more shy or unsure students or newer students kind of cowering at the back. So how do we make sure that everybody has participated? So it might be that you are doing Q&A, question and answer, throughout the lesson, but you're making sure that nobody answers twice so we don't hear the same voice over and over again. It could be that you're doing lots of individual correction, so you know that you're including those learners as you speak to them. You know, using their names is essential as well, so you must learn their names and then you can include them. Peer work, so that they're having to engage with their peers, task setting, etc. So today, in today's world of teaching, unlike maybe how some of us were even taught, it's no longer good enough to stand at the front and just teach. We need to engage and include our learners so that they are in charge of their learning. So in a way, we should be facilitating them to learn as opposed to thinking that we have to teach them. It's not about us just standing there and imparting our knowledge. It's about knowing what we want them to achieve and then finding ways that we can make them get there. And lastly, motivation. Obviously, we know that students of all levels need to be motivated to stay engaged in the lesson and therefore achieve. So that might be through positive praise. It might be little incentives, whether, that's with little ones, that could be stickers, or it could be something, something else, resources, your own demonstration. Sometimes you are that role model that they look up to so much, and just watching you, it sometimes feels a little bit conceited, but it's a really, really valuable tool to sometimes just say, do you know what, guys, watch me do it and I'll show you, especially when it comes to performance. If they're not using their faces, let me show you how, I would perform this. And they watch, and then they critique you and tell you what was good and what you could improve. So that can be an inspiration and a motivation on its own. So we'll look at a few more specific examples. So differentiation, for example, we could encourage our more capable students to attempt a double pirouette rather than a single. We might briefly recap an amalgamation that we've previously taught, and then get the students that have learned it before to partner with the students that are learning it for the first time, so that we're doing peer-to-peer teaching. So that the learner that is teaching is gaining from communication skills, clarifying the knowledge of the choreography, etc. And the pupil that is being taught is obviously learning the work. Or, for example, when teaching a pirouette, or when teaching anything, differentiate the different learning, the different teaching approaches and the different learning approaches that you're going to use. So say we're doing a pirouette, you might use a video resource. So you might show a video on YouTube of a wonderful pirouette. For your auditory learners, you might use an anatomical description, and maybe you use some tactile feedback for the kinesthetic learners. So you're working on their pirouette position, holding them up in retiro, for example. Examples of inclusion would be conducting Q&A through the lesson, ensuring, as I said, that everyone has a chance to answer one of the questions. Or it could be asking students to bring in their own piece of music for improvisation, because then you're including them and their ideas into the class. Motivation, resources is a brilliant motivator, so bringing a video in to get them inspired. Or it could be an incentive, like saying, if you know that your class love doing improvisation, then say, well, okay, we're going to get to improvisation, but do you remember that Tonju exercise we worked on? And do you remember that objective that we were looking at? Well, let's see that done accurately first, and if you get through that, then we'll look at improvisation. So we're always, dangling a bit of a carrot. You want to, in your plans, try and give at least one example of each of those. You may even want more examples of each, especially differentiation, because that differentiation, it's not just to do it once and it's ticked. It needs to be evident throughout your whole class. Following that, you've got a safe dance practice box, and it's basically like a little mini risk assessment for the class, and you're going to try and give different examples each week. So for this one, it's fairly self-explanatory, so I've just given you some examples rather than explaining exactly what you could write. So an example would be ensure the fire door is kept clear in case of a fire, and what to do if that wasn't the case. Ensure adequate temperature, maybe at the point that you do your plans, it's very cold outside, so I need to make sure that the studio is warm, and what you would do about that, and ensuring students are in correct uniform without jewellery, and a brief, like you did in your observations, a brief kind of explanation as to why that's important, and any action that needs to be taken. Okay, so we're about to get into the actual lesson plan now. So the main part of the lesson plan is looking at your different teaching methods of how you're going to actually get your concepts across. So let's look through a few of these. So I've split these up into teacher-led and student-led. So teacher-led things might be things like instruction, which may be a big bulk of your class. You need to be careful, as we've said before, that it's not just all instruction, and that's a big fault that often happens with student teachers, they want to get up and show all of their knowledge and show how much they've learned in their DDE, and they just lecture, and that's not really appropriate when teaching children. They'll switch off. Explanation, giving context to something, you know, well, why do we do retiros at the bar? What's it going to, you know, develop to eventually? Why do we do a retiro position? How is that going to become a pirouette later? Imagery and analogies are key. So being able to give imagery that helps a student understand what they need to do is so helpful. So try and think up as much imagery as you possibly can when you're teaching, and use it throughout. Accurate demonstration. Your demonstration is the most important thing, because a lot of your students are not going to know anything other than you, which is why when you watch students dance, you always know who their teacher was or is, because they dance just like the teacher dances. If the teacher's got lovely something, you know, quality, then all the students have lovely quality. If the teacher has bad habits, the students will pick up the bad habit. So your accurate demonstration is key. And again, a classic, you know, early teacher, early in their career, I see teachers feeling like maybe they don't want to like push themselves and really show off because, you know, it's not their class. And no, it's not about you, it's about your students. But when you are demonstrating, it needs to be as perfect as you can make it, because that is the model that they're going to copy. So you cannot flop through it, you cannot look lazy, you cannot look uninspiring or uninspired. You need to look dynamic, technical, exciting to watch so that your students pick that up. Goal setting, so you could set some of their goals for them. Q&A. You know, oh, tell me last week, what position of the feet do we start in for this exercise, or whatever you want to ask. Scaffolding and chunking, you might remember these from your observations. So chunking is where we learn a small chunk, so you might learn the first 4 counts, and then the next 4, and then you put it together. And scaffolding is building on something, so we're going to do a turning sequence, but let's start with just the feet, then we'll add the arms, then we'll add the turn. Use of resources we've discussed, so being able to bring things in, and those resources might be anything, we'll get to that in a minute, and games, anything you can make into a game, especially with your younger students, but the older ones love it as well, the better. So, you know, I used to do things like quiz shows, so we'd have 2 teams and they'd have buzzers, and some of it would be performance based and some of it would be Q&A, and we'd add up the points and things like that. They absolutely love that sort of thing. So the more things you can do like that, the better. And then on to the student-led teaching methods. So things like peer teaching, we've discussed before. You teach that to that person and then we might swap you over. Or peer assessment. Watch your partner and see if they left their head till the last minute on that spot and then whipped it round as quick as they can. Or see how many times they got their heels down in their sautés, or whatever. So you're not just testing the student that's being tested, but the one that's doing the testing is also learning to get their critical eye, and that's going to make it more successful when they do it themselves. Teach the teacher is a really fun one, especially with little children, because they find this really funny. So things like, I'm going to show you this port de bras and I want you to pop your hand up as soon as you see me do something wrong, and then you do something very exaggerated and wrong and silly, and then you can also get them to come and fix you. So what, you know, a nice thing to do is to say, right, is this the correct posture? And you arch your back and you stick your chin out and all different things, and you say, it's fine, you can come up here and put me back together properly, and they prod you back together until you're in a nice straight line. Things like that, they love that. Self-assessment, so that'll be teaching themselves, so in the mirror. Also you can videos, really good technique with the older students for pirouettes is slow-mo video, and reflect back on it, so things like that. Getting them to set their own goals, getting them to research certain things. You know, when we're in grade 6 modern, for example, the floor sequence is very much Alvin Ailey inspired, so get them to go and find out about Alvin Ailey and bring in a certain part of a certain piece of information each. Group tasks, so working together to achieve a task, or partner work, the same thing but just in partners. So that gives you some ideas of teaching methods, but they are completely open-ended. You could come up with anything that you possibly want. So looking at resources, which is a teaching method to use resources, just to give you some ideas. So that could be flashcards, it could be spots on the mirror for when you're doing spotting, it could be pictures in the corner for changes of direction, it could be worksheets, bringing in photos or videos. Things in the studio that you're going to use, like bars or mirrors, count as a resource. If you were to do my little filming exercise that I just said about, the phone or the tablet or whatever, or the research that you're doing on those things, so that phone or tablet would be a resource. Posters, games, if you're bringing something in, like I quite often do like a vocabulary game, and they have to pick out of a hat different pieces of paper which have steps, like vocabulary steps written on them, and then choreograph a little something together with those. So that hat and piece of paper is a resource. Your music is a resource, so whether that's your set music or free music, and of course props. So if you use props to aid quality or for fun or whatever it happens to be, that's also a resource. Now this is one of the more difficult sections in your plan, key assessment points, and new teachers find this really difficult. So this is all about basically how will you know if a student has met your objective? Because it's all very well saying, right, I want them to be able to understand, like I said, what an accented eighth note is. Well, how do you know that they've understood that? You need to have a way of assessing, and sometimes that is very obvious. You're going to look. So if it's just a case of I'm going to look, then we call it visual check over here. So I would just say I'm going to visually check that all of the learners can demonstrate an accurate second position or whatever with the certain criteria that I want achieved. It could be Q&A. So tell me how many quarter notes fit into one bar, for example, and they would, if they understand that, they'll be able to answer you correctly, and if they don't, well, we need to look at how we can explain that in a different way that you understand it. Peer check, so that those examples that I gave you before of checking their peer and making sure that the peer is doing what you've asked them to do. Use of mirrors, so they assess themselves. Individual check is really important, so especially, well, in all genres, but especially tap dancing, where you need to actually hear the work, you need to hear it individually. So, you know, your objective might be that they can achieve a 4-beat riff by the end of the lesson. Well, you need to hear that individually in order to know whether they've done that or not. Facing away from the mirrors or covering the mirrors is a good way to assess knowledge, because we all know that it's very easy to kind of just, you know, scooch along when there's other people that know what they're doing next to you if you're looking at them in the mirror. So face away from the mirror and see if that works. Games and tests, or as we said before, ask the student to explain. Can you explain to me what you need to do in this particular exercise? And if they can explain it, and maybe they can't do it yet, then we know that's half the battle. Okay, well, they get it. What am I going to do next week which will actually allow them to implement that into their body? So this is a really important one, and every teaching method that you're going to use, you need a key assessment point for, or every objective that you want to achieve, you need a key assessment point. So how are you going to know whether what you've just done has been effective or not? Feedback. So feedback is key. Obviously, that is the whole reason we are there, is to offer expert feedback that those students would not be able to give to themselves, and that they can't learn off of YouTube or Instagram. We are there giving them live feedback, nothing more important. So a couple of little traps that new teachers often find themselves in: saying good for everything. So good, yep, that was good, yep, good, 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 okay. So make sure you don't overpraise. Sometimes we so want to, especially with the students that are struggling, but we need to make sure that are praises specific. So here, specific, clear and concise. So that student, if it is good, well, why? If it actually was good, by all means, say it was good. But you shouldn't ever just say good. It should be, oh, that was so much better because you really stretched your front leg like I asked you to. Now they know exactly what they did well. So that's really important. So we don't want to overpraise, but of course we don't want to over-criticise. And we want to make sure we've got, a really positive and compassionate atmosphere in our class. It's sometimes, we all get frustrated with our students because we know that they can do better, we know that they could concentrate more, whatever it happens to be. But just remember, you don't know what's going on in your students' lives, and coming into your class and providing a positive and compassionate atmosphere is everything. It's the most important thing. So really think about that. The days of teaching through being harsh and humiliating, they're over, because research has proven now that that's not effective. That's not an effective way for people to learn. It's not to say that no one's ever learned anything through those methods, and maybe many of you were trained in those methods. I know I was in a lot of cases, and it worked for me in places, but for most people, they need a positive and compassionate environment where they're allowed to go wrong and where they're allowed to grow. Your feedback, consider whether you're doing group or individual feedback, and there's pros and cons for both, because sometimes you don't want to pick someone out because you know that that would embarrass them, or it's not appropriate in that moment, or you've been moaning about it for ages and you think, rather than keep getting on that particular student's case, I'm going to say it to everyone and see if they pick it up from there. Sometimes you'll find that the same students apply group correction even if they don't need to. Your conscientious students will overcorrect themselves to try and please you and do what you're asking, and the ones you're actually saying it for, ignore it. In which case we really need to look at individual correction and feedback, which is so crucial anyway, because obviously all your learners are different. They all have different needs, different strengths and weaknesses, so you've got to make your feedback tailored individually to each one. A little bit like what I was just saying here, just be very mindful. Sometimes, especially with your teenagers, might be other things going on, and sometimes you just think, do you know what? That's not worth giving you that correction today, because I can see you're just not in the right place to take it. It's enough that you're here and you're getting through the class. We'll work on that next week. You just don't need to say anything. So just like being a good human being a good teacher is, really thinking and looking at the person in front of you and working out what that person needs. Your feedback needs to be non-egocentric. So it's not about showing off what you know. It's about picking the information that's relevant and going to help your students the most. The peer-to-peer feedback is still guided by the teacher. So you will find with little ones, if you ask them to peer-to-peer teach, they are sometimes quite brutal. So we need to make sure that, because little kids are so honest, we need to make sure that that's managed so we don't have any upset children. And with the older ones, quite often they're embarrassed to critique, so they just say good things and nothing else. And so it's important that we guide it. So you might say, can you tell me one really good thing and one thing you want to improve? And, work on your language. So you don't say one good, one bad. You say, something you think they could work on further, so that they get used to giving compassionate, constructive criticism themselves. This is another lecture in itself, but do some research on mindset, growth mindset versus fixed mindset, because what we have learned through research in recent years is that as teachers, if we praise the effort, the method and the approach, as well as maybe instead of the outcome, we will get a better outcome. So it's no good just praising all the kids that do it really well. They might not have even tried. And it's also no good to keep saying to your slightly less able students, oh, good try, oh, well done, you tried hard. That is done in good intention, but actually what we need to teach all of those students to do is learn well. is know what works for them. Know that for them it's only going to go in if they go and sit and write down that correction. That's the only way it goes in, or whatever it happens to be, and that's a life lesson for them. So we're going above and beyond teaching them dance there. Quick prompts. So if one day you used bean bags under their hands in their sautés to make sure they're holding their arms correctly, then you don't need to use the bean bags again. You just shout bean bags next time you're doing it, and they'll all remember. Ask students to demonstrate that they understand your feedback before moving on. This is crucial. So another real easy pitfall for new teachers, we've all done it when we first start out, is you say, oh, make sure that you actually transfer your weight there, otherwise you're not going to be able to do that. And then they say, yeah, okay. And you go, do you understand? Yeah. And then you move on. It's no good. That will never, ever go in. So you need to say, okay, show me one more time then. And you need to get them to repeat it, implementing the correction. If you've then got time, redo the whole exercise and get them to put that correction in. Because the students aren't being rude or lazy when they say, yeah. I think we all are guilty of really having good intentions of doing exactly what it is we're told. But if we don't implement and get that in our brains and our bodies, it just won't happen. So you must, any correction that you give, you must follow it through. And lastly, our whole goal is developing intrinsic motivation. So as I say, we are not motivating through external sources of being cross if they don't get it right or anything like that. We want to develop an atmosphere whereby they want to get it right just because it feels great to learn and to do well and to achieve. That's intrinsic motivation. So it's not all about the fancy competition or the Instagram post or the whatever, which of course our students are very led by these days. We need to bring an atmosphere where they are just motivated through the sheer process of it being good to do things well. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of how that might fit into your class plan. So over here, you're going to say the amount of time that that's going to take you in the lesson. You may or may not also want to write the time of the lesson. I find that quite useful. So if my lesson starts at 5 o'clock, I would write 5 to 5:10 here, just because then I can very quickly cross-check against the clock and know whether I'm ahead or behind. So my activity is I'm doing a port de bras choreography task / vocab test. My teaching method is I'm going to ask the students to pick a piece of paper from a bag detailing 2 arm positions in French. They must correctly identify the arm positions and use them within their choreography. My resources are free music, and I've written a piece of music, and also the bag should be there as well. The piece of paper and the bag should be there. And then my key assessment points. So how am I going to know that they could correctly identify those positions? So I'm going to visually check that the students have correctly identified the positions they're given, and I'm then going to check that these arm lines are in their choreography. So first of all, if they pick out the bag on everyone and on Caron, I'm going to say, right, what are those 2? Yep, they've shown me, yep, I've checked that you know that, now put it in your choreography, and then I'll visually check that it went in there. Then I know, tick, they've done the outcome of the objective that I wanted them to achieve. And then a different one, 5 minutes for this one, Petit Allegro tactile correction. So I'm going to physically correct students' arm lines, ready for them to maintain position during jumps. So the resource that I'm going to use is bean bags. So I'm going to use bean bags between their hands and their thighs to maintain their arm positions. And I'm going to visually check that they can maintain the arm position when jumping and that they can keep the bean bag there without dropping it. So I know that if they've dropped it or their arms are going floppy and going everywhere, they haven't achieved the objective that I wanted. And then at that point, I'd probably maybe not move on to the next thing until I go back, find maybe a different angle, a different approach, and see if I can really hit that objective. Okay, so we're now on to the evaluation. So we've finished the plan, we've now taught the lesson. You may or may not have stuck exactly to your plan. You might have adapted it slightly, which is definitely encouraged. In fact, you get marks for that in your final teaching assessment. And at this point, you then go home, ideally as soon after the lesson as possible, and evaluate. So you're going to evaluate using the questions on the form that I showed you earlier. You can use note form. The whole section has 800 words, so it's roughly 100 words per question. So we'll just talk through each of the questions. So how effective was my planning? Did I structure my class well? Did I get through everything that I planned, or did I have too much or not enough content to cover? And that's takes a bit of time to get used to what you can actually fit in. Did I balance the sections well? So, it wouldn't be a very well balanced class if I had an hour's ballet class and I spent 45 minutes of it at the bar, because I didn't do enough in the centre. So, did I really think about the balance? Did I balance set and free work? We'll talk more about that in a little while, but that is key. It's not a set class only. We must include free work to develop ourselves towards the set work. Did I have a good balance between static work and travelling work? That's really important, especially with younger ones. If you're expecting them to stand on the spot, especially if you've got little boys in there, yeah, you need to make sure that the next thing they do is travelling and just going a bit more free. And did I have a good balance between different teaching methods and ways of engaging different learners? Did I stand at the front of the class and just lecture them the whole time, or did I actually find lots and lots and lots of different ways of engaging them? The more the better. Every single exercise or thing that you do should have a different approach. The next one, did my content and delivery provide for all learners, and how do I know this? So what differentiation strategies did I use? Were they effective? How did I know? If they weren't, what can I do to improve that next time? Were all my learners included in the lesson at some stage? How do I know? So it's no good just saying, yep, I really included all my learners in the lesson. You need to say, because at some point every single learner answered one of my questions. However, I did feel that the same students were in charge during the group task, so I need to work on how I can more fairly divvy up the groups in future, or something like that. Were learners in charge of their own learning, or did I deliver it like a lecture? Next one, did my lesson contain a safe structure in relation to the pace, intensity and amount of repetition? So the pace is how quickly did you get through a certain activity? If you ran at a quick pace, was that safe to do? Did you start, they've just joined grade 5 and we're going to spend it doing, pirouettes or something. We've done no build up to it. We're just going to do loads and loads of them. Have I built up to this in previous lessons to make it safe? And was the intensity and repetition safe? So if I worked on leaps, did I ensure that the students had adequate rest in between each go? And was the amount of repetition appropriate for their age and ability? So, if you just keep on drilling them over and over and over and they're only in grade 4, it's maybe not quite safe. How effective were my teaching methods? So firstly, what teaching methods did I use? Which ones worked well and how do I know this? So it might be as simple as the students were all smiling, so I know they really enjoyed this. Or, by the end, the students could all show me the triple time step individually, so I know that my method that got them there was effective. So you're really breaking it down and quite, as if the person reading it has no idea what you're talking about. Which ones weren't so effective? Here's an example for you. What could I improve on next time? So, e.g., I used peer correction by splitting them into 2 groups and asking them to correct each other. However, they were only willing to say nice things about the other group rather than giving any constructive criticism. Next time, I think I will guide them by asking them to think of one compliment and one piece of constructive criticism for the other group, so they are ready to give both. So, in your evaluation, do not just say, everything I did was great. Equally, don't say everything I did was awful. Be honest, what worked and what didn't. And if it didn't work, don't just accept that. Think, what do I need to do next time? What am I going to try? And next time it might not work. But it's all about showing progression and experimentation. This is the part of your career where you're not set yet. And in fact, this is going to be some of your best teaching you'll ever do because you're not set in your ways yet. So you really need to just experiment with your different methods. What communication and motivational strategies did I use and what was the effect on learning? So which motivational techniques did I use today? Were they effective? If so, how do I know? If not, how would I improve them? So, if you showed your 32 fouettes from Swan Lake and they all just went, oh, well, we're never going to be able to do that, then maybe it wasn't actually as effective as you'd hope it to be. So you need a different tactic next time. What kind of communication did I use? E.g. Q&A, verbal instruction, tactile correction, non-verbal communication, use of different words, whether that's imagery, counts, noises, etc. So an example would be, I used non-verbal communication by giving a high five to one of the shyer students who had shown excellent progress in her choreography task. She was visibly pleased by this and continued to improve, so I think it was an effective form of communication which boosted her confidence. So I've not just gone, I high-fived one of the shy kids, and so that was good. I've explained, I can see she was visibly pleased by that, and it made her improve, so it was effective. Yeah, so you've got to really explain how you knew it was good. What feedback did I give? So you can go back to the feedback page earlier for examples. And an example here would be, I gave lots of group feedback through the lesson, which most students responded to really well. However, some students were ignoring my group feedback, possibly because they didn't think it applied to them. Next week, I'm going to give more individual feedback, so it's more specific to each student. I'm going to aim to give them at least one piece of individual feedback each. So again, said, I didn't actually work as well as I'd hoped, and this is what I'm going to try next week to see if I can fix that. Assessment. What progress did my students make, and how can I use this to forward plan? So progress could be individual or as a group. So it could be that the whole group were on time today, and they're usually always late. That's a group progression. Or it could be individual. That student has never been able to improvise before, and today they gave it a go. Huge. It could be over the course of a few lessons or within today's lesson. So at the beginning of the lesson they couldn't do X, Y and Z and now they can. Or 3 weeks ago she couldn't get the sound of that elevator pickup and today she got it. Those progress examples could be technical, artistic, or in relation to behaviour, mindset, approach, etc., which are just as important. So an example would be, I do not feel that they made adequate progress with their overall attention and engagement. They were still getting easily distracted and chatty. Next week I'm going to try and devise a point system to try to incentivise them to concentrate harder through the class. So again, I'm not saying that you can never have stern words with your students, because sometimes that is what they need. They need sitting down and saying, come on guys, this isn't good enough, you need to do more here. But that's last resort. First resort is, it's your job, it's the onus is on you to try and motivate them in a different way. So rather than be like, oh gosh, they're such a chatty class and they're always distracted, look at yourself and think, but am I motivating them? So let's find a different approach. And lastly, what did I learn from this lesson to help me in the future? So reflect on your own teaching today. What did you learn about your approach, your manner, your teaching methods that you didn't know before the class started? It's fine to be critical, it's good to be critical, but make sure you consider the possible solution too. For example, I've learnt that teenagers are not always predictable, and sometimes a task which I may think would really motivate them was actually detrimental because they just didn't take it seriously. I have to find ways of getting them to stay engaged whilst also learning. And just some overall tips as we draw to the end of this lecture. So, as we've said, we're trying to engage the students in their own learning. So we're not, like this, standing at the front and lecturing and explaining everything they need to do. You're going to get them to be in charge of their own learning. You've worked hard on your aims and objectives in your plan. Describe them at the start. So again, they're involved. This isn't some secret that only you know. They're involved in their own learning. Big one, balance the class, half set work and half free work. The syllabus is a framework, and it is only a lazy teacher, unfortunately to say, that just goes in and teaches a syllabus. You have to, in your teaching, where you are working with children, especially, and teenagers, you're not just there to teach them a syllabus to pass the exam. The exam is not the sole focus. It's not, so, with you doing your DDE, that is a big focus on why you're doing this. You need the qualification. For them, what's more important, that they get their grade 5 modern, or that they develop a passion for dance and for learning and for performing and for choreography that's going to stand them in good stead whether they go into this industry or not. That's what we're here for. So if you just teach the set work all the time, it's boring for them and it's really boring for you as well. So make sure you mix it up. We never go directly to set work. So on the first lesson of grade 5 modern, you don't just go straight into the warm-up and teach the set one. You build up all the components, you break down all of the components they're going to need to know, and then you build up to them using free work. So at the beginning of just starting a grade with students, you almost do no set work at all. You're just building up lots of different components. Judge each learner's needs and ability to accept feedback, as we've discussed. Back to free versus set. Use free music wherever possible. Even if you're doing set work, you can still use free music. Down here, dress appropriately and professionally. Be a role model. So neat hair and makeup, clothes which show off the line of the body. Look smart. You know, sometimes I see teachers and they want to look so casual and kind of down with the kids, so to speak. And actually, it's not professional. They need to go looking smart, well put together, because that is what the students will respect. Set the class atmosphere as you mean to go on. So, you know, your car might have broken down earlier and your cat was sick in the living room or whatever it happens to be, but as long as you are fit and able to get to that class, you go in with a positive attitude. You don't bring things in because you are there as that role model. And we're expecting that from them as well. You know, we're not going to ask them to hide their feelings, I'm not saying that, but we are trying to create an atmosphere whereby they get to forget about other things when they come in that class and they enjoy that class and that safe environment, and you're going to set that right from the beginning. So super positive as they come in, welcome them. Always reinforce and repeat corrections before moving on. We've discussed that. So you never just say it, they go, yeah, 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 and then we move on. You always make them repeat it. Model the approach you want your students to adopt. You want them to be positive, eager to learn and passionate. What else? What do you personally, what's most important to you? Maybe being compassionate to others is the most important for you, much more important than whether they've got gorgeous plie or whatever it happens to be. So you're going to adopt that in what you teach or whatever. So we all need to look at certain core values that we're trying to model for them to copy, but you might have specific ones that you particularly want to drive forward in your teaching. Experiment, we've talked about that. Don't just find a way and then just leave it. Work around, try, tweak it, and work out what works best. Then you'll get a new class and you'll have to start with square one because every class is different. Have a well-balanced lesson plan, but don't be afraid to adapt when needed, as we've discussed. And always allow time for reflection at the end. So try and just have a couple of minutes, all age groups, to say, what did we learn today? It's really good. With your little ones, it's good because it kind of gets them thinking about what they've actually learned, but also, especially those of you that are running businesses, those kids run out and their mums go, and then mums and dads say, oh, what did you learn today? And they go, well, nothing. Whereas if they can run out and they say, oh, we actually learned how to develop our rhythmicality through our choreography, their parents are going to be quite impressed and probably keep sending them to you. So it's making them understand that they really are learning something. And you know, research shows the more that we reflect on things after we do them, the more likely they are to go into our long-term memory. Okay, so last thing, to summarise, we need to. We've got 3 different sections here. So first section, we need to arrange a class that you can teach for 5 consecutive weeks, or 2 classes for 5 consecutive weeks if you didn't do the assisting. Before the lessons, complete the planning section of the lesson plan, teach the lesson. After each lesson, complete the evaluation section of the plan, send this to your tutor, who will then add their comments and return to you. The second part is that you're going to arrange, during that first section, arrange with your tutor for them to observe your 2nd or 3rd or 7th or 8th taught lesson. Before the lesson, you're going to complete, just on this one, you're going to complete the planning section and send it to your tutor before you actually teach the lesson, because they need to see what you're planning to do. Then you teach the lesson. Then after the lesson, you evaluate as normal and then resend the whole thing that's now complete to your tutor, who will add their comments. and then your tutor will write up your assessment results and arrange a Zoom tutorial to discuss this with you. Finally, after you've completed all those 5 or 10 lessons, you then plan your 6th or your 11th class, which is going to be filmed. You teach the filmed class, you evaluate the class as normal, send the paperwork to your tutor, who will put the comments on as normal, upload your footage and paperwork to Totara, and your tutor can advise you on that, and then you'll have your Viva, your Skype or your Zoom session with the assessor, who will give you your feedback, and then you wait for your results. And that is the end of this little tutorial for your Unit 2 of your DDE.